In the United States, the death penalty is the ultimate punishment, irreversible and final. But what happens when innocent lives are taken by mistake? Tonight, we explore 4 haunting stories of wrongful executions, cases where the justice system failed and lives were lost forever. This is a story of doubt, recantations, and the fight for truth. This is not a script, neither is it a movie. It really happened in Missouri, Arkansas, and in Texas, twice. Names that should be in history books for surviving injustice are now etched in execution logs. These were men who may have been innocent, but were killed by the state anyway. Before we begin, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming uploads. We tell real stories, carefully researched, respectfully delivered, because some voices deserve to be heard, even after the world has stopped listening. Let's begin. Case 1. Marcellus Williams. On the morning of August 11, 1998, Felicia Gale, a 42-year-old former reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, was found brutally murdered in her home in University City, Missouri. She had been stabbed 43 times in her bathroom, and the violent nature of the crime shocked the community. Gale had left journalism years earlier and was known to be deeply involved in charitable and community work, making the crime seem even more senseless and baffling. The house had no signs of forced entry and valuables were reportedly untouched, prompting speculation about the killer's motives from the outset. The investigation quickly gained urgency, and by 2001 Marcellus Williams, a black man with a troubled past, was arrested and convicted of her murder. Williams had a prior record for burglary, and the prosecution's case against him rested largely on the testimony of 2 witnesses: his former girlfriend, Laura Acero, and a fellow inmate, Henry Cole, who claimed that Williams had confessed to him while they were both incarcerated. But troubling details were already beginning to emerge. There was no physical evidence that tied Williams to the scene. No fingerprints, no blood, no hair, no DNA. None of the forensic evidence recovered from Gale's home, not even from the murder weapon, a kitchen knife found lodged between the cushions of a chair, matched Marcellus Williams. Instead, the entire case hinged on the reliability of human testimony, which over time would prove alarmingly unstable. Years after his conviction, both Acero and Cole's testimonies were called into serious question. Key portions of their statements were inconsistent, and both had received financial or legal incentives in connection to their cooperation with law enforcement. Laura Acero later recanted parts of her testimony, saying that she had been under pressure and that her statements had not been entirely truthful. In addition, questions were raised about ineffective assistance of counsel during Williams' trial, including the defense's failure to challenge witness credibility and to present exculpatory evidence. In 2016, nearly 2 decades after the murder, DNA testing was conducted on the knife used in the killing. The results did not match Marcellus Williams, a fact that should have been grounds for a full legal reassessment of the case. Instead, a troubling standoff began. Despite the DNA evidence, state authorities maintained that the conviction was sound. By 2017, just hours before Williams was scheduled to be executed, Missouri Governor Eric Greitens issued a stay of execution and appointed a board of inquiry to review the case, a highly unusual move that acknowledged the seriousness of the doubts surrounding Williams' conviction. The board began reviewing the case, but its findings were never publicly released. In January 2024, St. Louis County Prosecuting Attorney Wesley Bell, a former public defender who had reviewed the case in depth, made headlines when he filed a motion to vacate Williams' conviction. Bell cited profound concerns about the fairness of the original trial, including racial bias during jury selection, problematic witness testimony, and the exclusion of crucial DNA evidence. Bell stated explicitly, "This is not a declaration of innocence, but a declaration of uncertainty. We cannot say with confidence that Marcellus Williams is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt." Despite this, on September 24, 2024, the state of Missouri carried out the execution of Marcellus Williams by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre. This occurred after the Missouri Supreme Court denied all further appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court refused to intervene. Governor Mike Parson rejected requests for clemency and declined to release the findings of the Board of Inquiry established in 2017. Here's something to think about, something worth pausing for. If physical evidence proves that someone else touched the murder weapon, and every witness against the accused admits they lied, how can justice be served by carrying out the sentence anyway? Williams' execution sparked an outcry from across the legal community and civil rights organizations. The Innocence Project, Amnesty International, and the ACLU, among others, condemned the decision, calling it a devastating example of how the justice system can fail, even in the presence of serious doubts and new exculpatory evidence. Activists pointed to the undisclosed results of the board investigation, suggesting that critical insights into Williams' innocence may have been buried. Legal experts questioned how a man could be executed when DNA from the murder weapon, one of the most powerful forms of forensic evidence, did not match him, and when the lead prosecutor had publicly argued against the conviction. Williams maintained his innocence until his death. In his final statement, he quoted scripture and reaffirmed his belief that the truth would one day come to light. The case of Marcellus Williams now stands as one of the most disturbing examples in recent memory of a potentially innocent man put to death, not for lack of evidence but in spite of it. Marcellus Williams' story is a sobering reminder that in the pursuit of justice, mistakes can be fatal. Case 2, Liddell Lee. Liddell Lee was born on July 31, 1965 in Arkansas. He grew up in a poor neighborhood in Jacksonville, a working-class suburb just outside Little Rock. His early life was marked by hardship, poverty, and instability. He was the youngest of several siblings in a struggling African-American family that endured systemic inequality, poor education access, and inadequate legal resources. At the time of his arrest, Lee was a 28-year-old father with a limited formal education. He worked odd jobs and had a history of petty crimes, but nothing remotely close to the brutal murder for which he would ultimately be executed. On February 9, 1993, 26-year-old Deborah Reese was found dead in her home on Valentine Road in Jacksonville. She had been beaten 36 times with a tire thumper, a wooden tool similar to a club, which her husband had given her for protection. Reese was struck so violently that the imprints of the weapon were embedded in her skin. The brutal killing occurred in broad daylight, in her quiet suburban neighborhood. The police quickly focused on Liddell Lee, who had been seen in the area earlier that day. One woman claimed he had come to her door asking to use the phone. Police later found Reese's stolen bills hidden in a shoe at Lee's home, though there were no fingerprints or DNA evidence directly linking him to the murder scene. Lee was arrested within hours. In 1995 he was convicted of capital murder. But from the beginning his trial was plagued with problems. His court-appointed attorney was reportedly intoxicated during hearings and failed to challenge weak forensic evidence. No DNA testing was conducted on critical items like the murder weapon or clothing with bloodstains. Much of the case relied on eyewitnesses whose credibility was questionable and whose identification of Lee was based on brief sightings under unclear circumstances. Later appeals revealed that Lee's post-conviction counsel also failed him. They missed filing deadlines and never pursued the possibility of DNA testing. One judge described the legal representation Lee received as completely ineffective. On April 20, 2017, Liddell Lee was executed by lethal injection at the Cummins Unit Prison in Arkansas. It was the state's first execution in over a decade, part of a controversial plan to execute 8 men before Arkansas' supply of midazolam, the lethal injection sedative, expired. Lee continued to assert his innocence until his final breath. His last words were, "My name is Liddell Lee. I am innocent." His attorneys filed last-minute appeals requesting DNA testing, arguing that biological evidence from the scene had never been examined using modern techniques. But Arkansas courts, and ultimately the U.S. Supreme Court, denied those requests. In 2021, 4 years after Lee's execution, his family, supported by the Innocence Project and the ACLU, succeeded in gaining access to the evidence that had been denied testing during Lee's lifetime. The results were disturbing. DNA from an unknown male was discovered on the murder weapon, a bloody shirt, and the shoe print left at the crime scene. 5 fingerprints found at the scene matched neither Lee nor the victim. None of the forensic evidence, not one sample, linked to Liddell Lee. And the DNA did not match anyone in national criminal databases. Though this doesn't prove who committed the murder, it raises a chilling possibility that the real killer may still be unknown, and that Liddell Lee, a man who maintained his innocence for over 20 years, may have died for a crime he did not commit. The state of Arkansas executed Liddell Lee at 11:56 p.m. on April 20, 2017. His case now stands as one of the most glaring warnings about the dangers of rushing justice in the name of finality. His sister, Patricia Young, has continued to speak publicly, saying, "We keep pushing because we believe the truth is out there, and our brother deserves to have his name cleared. If a state executes someone and years later evidence proves that person's DNA was never even at the scene, what does that say about how we define justice?" Let us know what you think in the comments. Your voice matters, and it could help others think more critically about the systems we trust. Case 3, Carlos DeLuna. In the gritty working-class city of Corpus Christi, Texas, on the evening of February 4, 1983, 24-year-old Wanda Lopez was nearing the end of her shift at a Shamrock gas station. A young mother trying to build a life for herself and her daughter, Wanda had taken the job to support her family. But that night, the call she placed to 911 was not to report a robbery already in progress. It was to beg for help before it even began. "He's got a knife. I need help," she said in a trembling voice. Seconds later, her screams echoed through the phone line, and the line went dead. Minutes later, police arrived to find Wanda bleeding to death, stabbed multiple times with a lock-blade knife. Her attacker had fled. Witnesses reported seeing a Latino man fleeing the scene. Less than an hour later, Carlos DeLuna, a 20-year-old with a prior record but no history of violence, was found hiding shirtless under a truck 4 blocks away. He was arrested and charged with Wanda's murder. DeLuna insisted he hadn't killed Wanda. He claimed he ran from police because he was on parole for a non-violent offense and was afraid. But he also said he had seen the real killer, Carlos Hernandez, a man known in the neighborhood, who not only resembled him physically but had a violent past and a known penchant for carrying a lock-blade knife, the very type used to kill Wanda. The prosecution told a different story. They painted Carlos DeLuna as a liar and portrayed Carlos Hernandez as a fabrication, a phantom created to cast doubt. Despite Hernandez's known criminal record, including arrests for assaults and carrying knives, prosecutors told the jury that no such person existed. No physical evidence, no fingerprints, no blood, no weapon, tied DeLuna to the murder. The conviction hinged entirely on shaky eyewitness identifications and circumstantial evidence. DeLuna's public defender had no experience in capital murder cases and failed to investigate Hernandez's record or call witnesses who could have confirmed his existence. DeLuna was found guilty and sentenced to death. On December 7, 1989, Carlos DeLuna was executed by lethal injection at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. He maintained his innocence until his final breath. Years passed. The name Carlos DeLuna faded from headlines. But questions remained, serious ones. In 2004, 2 Chicago Tribune journalists, Maurice Posley and Steve Mills, reopened the case. What they found was stunning. Carlos Hernandez not only existed, he had a long criminal record and had told multiple people that he had stabbed Wanda Lopez and let the other Carlos take the fall. In fact, Hernandez had been arrested more than a dozen times after DeLuna's trial for crimes involving knives, and even carried the same style of lock-blade knife used in the Lopez murder. Photos showed he looked strikingly similar to DeLuna, enough to confuse even friends and family. Despite all this, none of this evidence was ever presented at trial. In 2012, Columbia law professor James Liebman and a team of law students conducted one of the most comprehensive posthumous death penalty investigations in U.S. history. Their report, titled Los Taqueas Carlos, the namesake Carloses, uncovered grave flaws in the investigation, prosecution, and defense. They found that the state's claim that Hernandez didn't exist was demonstrably false. They also uncovered witness recantations, poor forensic handling, and a pattern of systemic neglect in capital defense cases. The report concluded that Carlos DeLuna was almost certainly innocent. For the legal community, DeLuna's case became a symbol, not just of wrongful execution, but of how easily the system can fail when the stakes are highest. The Death Penalty Information Center and other justice reform advocates cited the case as irrefutable evidence that the U.S. has executed innocent people. Even former prosecutors who reviewed the case called for a re-evaluation of death penalty protocols in Texas. DeLuna's family, still grieving and still fighting for his exoneration, have never seen justice done. Carlos DeLuna's story isn't a mystery with a satisfying resolution. It's a chilling cautionary tale about mistaken identity, rushed justice, and the fatal price of a system that presumes guilt. But here's the question we must all stop to consider. If prosecutors insisted a man didn't exist, even when he did, and that decision helped put an innocent man to death, what else have we gotten dangerously wrong? Tell us in the comments section. Case 4, Ruben Cantu. On the night of November 8, 1984, in San Antonio, Texas, 25-year-old Pedro Gomez and 19-year-old Juan Moreno were sleeping in a house under construction, guarding it against recent thefts. 2 intruders broke in demanding money. When Gomez and Moreno resisted, they were both shot multiple times. Gomez died at the scene, while Moreno survived despite sustaining 9 gunshot wounds. The attackers fled, leaving behind no physical evidence. Moreno, an undocumented immigrant, provided a description of 2 Hispanic teenagers but could not identify the shooters. 4 months later, 17-year-old Ruben Cantu became a suspect after being involved in an unrelated shooting of an off-duty police officer. Despite the lack of physical evidence linking him to the Gomez murder, Cantu was arrested. Moreno, after being shown Cantu's photo multiple times by police, eventually identified him as one of the shooters. Cantu was tried and convicted of capital murder in 1985, based primarily on Moreno's testimony. He was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection on August 24, 1993, at the age of 26. Years after the execution, both Juan Moreno and Cantu's co-defendant, David Garza, recanted their testimonies. Moreno stated that he had been pressured by police to identify Cantu and that he had initially told them Cantu was not the shooter. He expressed deep remorse, saying, "It was a mistake and a person died who was guilty of nothing." Garza admitted that Cantu was not with him during the robbery and that he had allowed Cantu to be accused and executed for a crime he did not commit. The case against Cantu lacked physical evidence, relying solely on eyewitness testimony, which later proved unreliable. The prosecution's reliance on coerced and recanted testimonies has raised serious concerns about the integrity of the criminal justice system, particularly in capital cases. Former Bexar County District Attorney Sam Millsap, who prosecuted Cantu, later expressed regret, stating that he should not have sought the death penalty based on a single eyewitness account. Ruben Cantu's story serves as a stark reminder of the fallibility of the justice system and the irreversible consequences of capital punishment. These stories are not just about 4 men. They are about a justice system that, when rushed, unchecked, or reliant on flawed evidence, can make errors too devastating to undo. Marcellus Williams, Ledell Lee, Carlos DeLuna, Ruben Cantu. Each of these names carries a lifetime of pain, doubt, and irreversible loss. They were individuals, sons, brothers, human beings, condemned not only by a court of law, but by a system that ignored red flags, overlooked new evidence and refused to pause for truth. These cases do not represent rare exceptions. They are warnings, proof that the machinery of justice can be fallible, that eyewitnesses can be mistaken, that evidence can be missed or ignored, and that lives can be taken in error. They remind us that accountability must not end at the courtroom door. If even one innocent person is executed, what does that say about the price we're willing to pay in the name of justice? If this episode moved you, don't let these stories end here. Learn more, speak out, and support organizations like the Innocence Project, Equal Justice Initiative, and local reform efforts in your state. These groups work every day to uncover the truth, exonerate the innocent, and reform the broken parts of the criminal justice system that still operate in the shadows. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell to stay informed as we bring more stories that demand to be heard. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell us. What changes would you make to prevent another wrongful execution? Justice requires more than punishment. It requires truth. Thank you for watching.